Imagine, if you will, that you have just wrapped up like the most grueling year of your professional life.
Oh, yeah. We've all had those.
Right. You know the feeling. You've been taking on extra shifts, grinding through weekends, maybe even running a side hustle late into the night.
Just completely burning the candle at both ends.
Exactly. The exhaustion is just deep in your bones. But there is this underlying sense of pride, right? Because you know you've been generating income.
You're putting points on the board.
Yeah, you're putting points on the board. So the holidays roll around and you finally have a moment to breathe. You open up your banking app to look at your net worth.
Expecting a nice, healthy bump.
Right, a well-deserved bump.
Right.
But instead of growth, you see that your overall wealth hasn't just stagnated. It has actually shrunk by a third.
Man, it is a deeply unsettling scenario to even picture. I mean, you're running on the treadmill as fast as humanly possible, right?
Yeah.
Burning maximum energy, and yet the ground is somehow moving backward beneath your feet.
It's terrifying.
The harder you work, the poorer you become.
Take that precise, terrifying feeling, that paradox of high effort yielding negative wealth, and scale it up from a single household to an entire national economy.
Right.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are pointing our lens at a profoundly complex, frequently misunderstood economic mystery.
Yeah, we're looking at the negative wealth paradox of Zimbabwe.
Exactly. We are looking at a nation that sits on some of the most incredibly rich natural resource deposits on the planet.
Oh, absolutely. Massive deposits.
And boasting a historically highly literate and resilient population, right? But which has nevertheless spent significant periods of its modern history effectively overdrawing on its own future.
Yeah, and we have a massive stack of data to navigate today to figure out why. We're drawing heavily from the World Bank's World Development Indicators.
And for you listening, this data set is basically the ultimate vital signs chart for a country.
Right. It aggregates everything.
Yeah.
I mean, macroeconomic trends, governance scores, health outcomes.
Education statistics.
Yeah, education, and the really granular realities of the labor market. Millions of data points collected over decades.
So our mission today is to look completely past the surface level numbers because, it is incredibly easy to glance at a developing nation and just accept the surface narrative of poverty or struggle.
Oh yeah, people do it all the time, but that surface narrative doesn't tell you anything about how the economic engine actually works.
Or, more importantly, why that engine keeps stalling out despite having premium fuel in the tank.
Exactly. We are going to decode the complex underlying logic of this development cycle.
We want to find out how a country can simultaneously generate massive income while systematically bankrupting its future.
And framing this as a deep crisis of sustainability is just so crucial. The lessons buried in this specific World Bank data, well, they hold a mirror up to every single economy on Earth.
Regardless of where you happen to live.
Right, because it forces us to examine the critical difference between merely generating cash flow and actually building structural, multi-generational wealth.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand how a national economy can confuse income with wealth, we really have to start by looking at the sheer violent turbulence of its macroeconomic environment.
The roller coaster.
Yeah, the roller coaster. Let's look at the gross domestic product, the GDP volatility, stretching all the way back from 1960 to 2023.
And when you chart this data out, it does not look like a standard economic growth curve.
Not at all. The peaks and valleys are so extreme they almost defy standard economic modeling. Like, for instance, in 1970, Zimbabwe hit an absolute peak GDP growth rate of 22.57%.
Which is wild. Putting a 22.57% growth rate into perspective is vital here.
Right, because a healthy, mature economy aims for what, 2 or 3%?
Exactly. A steady 2% or 3% annual growth. Even these hyper-growth developing nations, the ones making global headlines for rapid modernization, they celebrate like 8% or 10% growth.
For 22% is just off the chart.
Hitting over 22% in a single year means the economy is running at an incredibly hot, almost feverish pace.
What does that even look like on the ground?
On the ground, it looks like explosive, localized industrial expansion, massive commodity booms, cranes on every skyline, and just a sudden, massive influx of capital.
But then you follow the timeline forward and the floor completely falls out.
Yeah, it does.
Moving toward the late 2000s, specifically peaking around that infamous crisis of 2008, the data shows a crushing, catastrophic low of negative 17.67%.
And a negative 17.67% contraction in a single year. I mean, that is a systemic collapse.
That's unimaginable.
For the human beings living inside that economy, it means the near total evaporation of their purchasing power.
Because it corresponds with an era of hyperinflation, right?
Exactly. Supply chains freeze completely. The currency loses its fundamental function as a store of value.
Right, people's life savings, their pensions, their business capital.
All of it is essentially wiped out overnight.
I think about what a swing from 22% growth to a almost 18% contraction does to the psychology of a country.
It's deeply traumatic.
Yeah. Even beyond the immediate pain of hyperinflation, the data shows that this specific type of volatility creates a permanent systemic problem regarding how people view the future.
And this is where we really have to introduce a metric from the World Bank that completely changes how we view economic success.
Okay, lay it on us.
It's called adjusted net savings, or ANS.
Right. So if traditional GDP is the measure of the raw cash flowing through your hands over a 12-month period.
Adjusted net savings is the true measure of what you are actually putting in the vault for tomorrow.
Okay, I like that distinction.
Yeah, while GDP measures gross income, ANS measures sustainable wealth creation. It corrects the blind spots of traditional economic tracking.
And the formula for ANS is brilliant in its pragmatism. Based on the sources, they define adjusted net savings as net national savings plus education expenditure.
Minus natural resource depletion.
Right, minus natural resource depletion and minus pollution damage.
And looking closely at why each of those components is included provides a really profound critique of how we usually measure success. Well, traditional GDP will tell you that if you cut down your entire national forest, strip mine all your mountains, and sell the raw materials overseas, your economy grew.
Right, your GDP numbers will look fantastic that year.
Exactly. But the ANS formula interjects and says, you didn't generate wealth. You just liquidated a vital, finite asset.
Wow. Yeah, that makes so much sense.
So it subtracts natural resource depletion, the permanent loss of minerals, energy reserves, and forests.
And it also subtracts pollution damage.
Specifically particulate emission damage, yeah. Because polluting the air creates long-term health burdens that will drain future public funds and destroy human capital.
And crucially, it adds education expenditure, which is so interesting.
Oh, it's huge.
It treats spending on schools and teachers not as a sunk cost or like mere consumption, but as a direct investment in the most valuable asset a country has.
It's human capital.
Yes, because education increases the future capacity to create higher-tier wealth. So ANS gives you the unvarnished, true balance sheet of the nation.
Which brings us to the most shocking data point in this entire World Bank stack.
Brace yourselves for this one.
When we look at the data from the early 2010s, specifically around 2011, Zimbabwe's adjusted net savings fell to a staggering negative 31.37% of gross national income.
Negative 31.37%.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like burning the floorboards of your house to keep the furnace running.
That is exactly what it is.
Sure. The house is temporarily warm today. And if you only measure the temperature of the room, which is essentially what GDP does, everything seems totally fine.
Right. The thermometer looks great.
But you're actively destroying the structural integrity of the home you live in. Eventually, you run out of floorboards and you're like freezing in the dirt.
And the sheer scale of a negative 31% deficit, I mean, it means the reported economic growth is a dangerous illusion.
And it's completely hollow.
The economy is literally cannibalizing its own physical and environmental foundation to sustain current consumption.
And this directly connects back to that extreme GDP volatility we discussed earlier, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. When an economy violently swings between boom and total collapse, the concept of a planning horizon is just eradicated.
Right. If I'm an investor looking at a system that swings from 22% up to 17% down, I cannot possibly plan for 5 years from now. My planning horizon shrinks to tomorrow.
Exactly. And if everyone in the economy is only planning for tomorrow, the only logical, rational move is to rip up the floorboards today.
You don't even know if the house will be there next week.
Without macroeconomic resilience, long-term capital accumulation becomes mathematically and psychologically impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you plan a 10-year national infrastructure project? How does a domestic entrepreneur invest in a factory that takes 5 years to build and 10 years to turn a profit?
When they don't know if the local currency will even exist in 6 months.
They don't. The only rational behavior left in that environment is pure, immediate extraction. You pull out whatever value you can right now.
But wait, I have to push back on this traditional development narrative a
Yeah,
bit.
go for it.
Isn't aggressive resource extraction exactly how a developing nation is supposed to build its initial capital?
Wow.
I mean, you look at the history of nations in the Middle East or the early days of the United States or modern Australia. You dig value out of the ground, you sell it on the global market, and you use that massive influx of cash to build your cities, your highways, and your universities.
Right.
So why is extraction leading to a negative 31% wealth drain here instead of funding a booming modernization era?
What's fascinating here is that exploring what economists call the resource curse provides the direct answer to that exact paradox.
The resource curse.
Yes. To understand why digging up wealth isn't translating into sustainable national wealth, we have to examine what specific kinds of resources are being extracted.
And far more importantly, the mechanics of how the rent from those resources is processed by the country's institutions.
Let's pull up the natural resource data for a second.
Okay, looking at natural resource rents as a percentage of total GDP,
Yeah.
and we see a massive, unmistakable surge around 2010.
Peaking at over 13.2% of the entire national economy.
Wow, over 13%. And the data breaks this down further. This surge is overwhelmingly driven by mineral rents like gold, platinum, diamonds, and forest rents.
And defining economic rent is crucial here because it operates very differently from, paying rent on an apartment or an office space.
It's a completely different concept.
In macroeconomic terms, a resource rent is the pure surplus value.
The profit.
Yes, it is the vast difference between the price at which a raw resource can be sold on the global commodity market and the actual physical cost of extracting it from the ground.
Okay, I see.
So when a country sits on highly valuable concentrated minerals like platinum or diamonds, those rents can be astronomically high.
It's essentially pure profit dictated entirely by external global commodity prices. Like, if the price of gold spikes in London, the rent spikes in Zimbabwe, completely independent of any actual innovation or productivity increase within the country itself.
Exactly. And when 13.2% of your entire national economic output is reliant on this pure profit from digging things out of the earth,
your economy becomes structurally tethered to the whims of global commodity markets.
yes. If the price of platinum drops globally, your entire national budget feels the shock wave immediately.
So this structural dependency acts as an amplifier for that macroeconomic roller coaster we were just dissecting.
Exactly. It makes the highs higher and the crashes much, much worse.
But again, other countries have successfully managed heavy resource wealth without derailing their economies.
Right.
Like Norway manages North Sea oil. Australia manages iron ore. The fuel itself isn't the problem. The problem seems to be the engine trying to process that fuel.
Which brings us face to face with the governance ceiling.
Ah, the governance ceiling.
This is where we have to integrate the Worldwide Governance Indicators, or WGI data. And I want to stress heavily here that as we unpack these numbers, we are absolutely not making political judgments or endorsing any specific ideology.
Right, we are impartially reporting the aggregated data provided by the World Bank.
Exactly. They meticulously synthesize surveys from enterprises, global citizens, and expert assessments. These metrics are designed to measure the sheer administrative efficiency and predictability of institutional environments.
And the WGI numbers for Zimbabwe paint an incredibly stark picture of systemic friction. Let's weave these metrics together.
Go ahead.
If we look at the control of corruption percentile rank around 2012, it plummets into the single digits. We're looking at a rank of 4.32.
4.32. That means out of 100 countries measured globally, roughly 95 have better institutional controls against public power being exercised for private gain.
That is a staggering bottleneck.
And the severity compounds when we look across the other institutional metrics. Consider regulatory quality.
Which measures what exactly?
It measures the fundamental ability of a government to formulate and implement sound policies that actually permit and promote private sector development.
Okay.
At its lowest points in the data set, this metric dropped below the first percentile. It hit 0.9.
Below the first percentile. Let's really ground that 0.9 in reality for a second.
Yeah, let's do it.
Imagine an entrepreneur trying to open a medium-sized logistics company or a domestic manufacturing plant. A regulatory quality score below the first percentile means the permitting process is just an impenetrable labyrinth.
A total nightmare.
It means arbitrary rules, endless delays, and a system where simply getting the legal right to operate a legitimate business is nearly impossible without encountering massive friction or navigating, let's say, unofficial channels.
Taking that a step further, suppose our hypothetical entrepreneur actually manages to open their factory.
Okay, they jump through all the hoops.
Suddenly, a larger entity or a connected competitor decides they want that factory. Our entrepreneur turns to the courts to defend their property rights.
And this is where we look at the rule of law estimate.
Exactly. The World Bank measures this in standard deviation units from the global mean, usually ranging from negative 2.5 to positive 2.5.
And Zimbabwe's estimate.
It has persistently hovered deep in the negative, around negative 1.3 standard deviations.
Statistically speaking, hovering at 1.3 standard deviations below the global mean drops you roughly into the bottom 10% of the world.
Yeah.
So our entrepreneur goes to court, but the legal framework lacks the independence or enforcement capability to protect them. They lose the factory.
And because the voice and accountability metric, which measures citizen participation, freedom of expression, and independent media, plummeted from a somewhat functional 30.5 percentile in the 1990s down to below 6.25 in the mid-2000s.
There is no viable mechanism to publicly report or correct the injustice.
None. And connecting these two realities exposes the core mechanics of the resource curse.
Right, so you have 13.2% of your GDP flowing in from highly lucrative, easily captured resource rents like diamonds and gold.
Simultaneously, you have an institutional framework operating in the bottom 10% globally across corruption control, regulatory quality, and rule of law.
It's like trying to run a high-speed bullet train on completely unaligned, broken tracks.
That's a great way to put it.
It doesn't matter how much premium, high-octane fuel, the resource wealth you pump into the engine. The friction of the broken tracks will eventually, inevitably, derail the train.
The wealth simply bleeds out into the surrounding dirt before it can power the society forward.
And that friction is why the resource wealth does not get reinvested into the broader population.
Exactly. The lack of institutional accountability means the vast surplus rents are captured by a narrow segment of the economy.
Furthermore, the absence of a predictable, boring, functional rule of law creates an insurmountable barrier to long-term foreign direct investment.
Oh, absolutely. Global manufacturers are not going to build a billion-dollar high-tech plant in a country where regulatory quality is at the first percentile and contracts cannot be enforced.
They will only enter the market to do one specific thing: extract the raw minerals as quickly as possible and offshore the profits.
Yep. This governance ceiling means that no matter how much platinum or gold sits beneath the soil, the sheer friction of weak institutions destroys the value before it can ever be converted into sustainable national wealth.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because this raises a massive contradiction.
Okay, what's that?
We are talking about a broken institutional track, but Zimbabwe is famous globally for having an incredibly highly educated, deeply literate population.
Right. They are known for their education.
So shouldn't a smart, literate population be able to demand better governance, fix the tracks, and build a diversified economy?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, shifting our focus to the population data answers that exact question.
Okay.
Because a highly literate population is only capable of driving structural economic reform if they are physically, demographically, and structurally empowered to do so.
Makes sense.
We have to look at the unimaginable burdens placed on the citizens themselves to understand why human capital isn't breaking through the governance ceiling.
This brings us to the human capital paradox. When you open the demographic data, it immediately paints a picture of a society carrying a crushing, almost unmanageable weight.
It really does. Let's look at the population age pyramid, specifically focusing on the child dependency ratio.
Okay, define dependency ratio for us.
The dependency ratio is a crucial metric for understanding societal pressure. It measures the ratio of dependents, meaning people younger than 15 or older than 64, against the active working age population aged 15 to 64.
So it basically tells us how many non-working individuals every single active worker has to financially carry on their back.
Exactly. And the data here is absolutely staggering. In previous decades, the child dependency ratio in Zimbabwe reached over 101.79%.
Over 101%. Think about your own household for a second.
Yeah, picture it.
If you and your partner are both working and you have 3, 4, maybe 5 kids, plus an elderly parent you are fully supporting, the financial pressure is suffocating.
You're stretched incredibly thin.
Every single dollar of your paycheck goes immediately to food, basic shelter, clothing, and primary education for your dependents. There is zero surplus capital left over for you to invest in a new business, pursue advanced training, or save for the future.
Now take that intense, localized household pressure and scale it up to an entire nation.
It's hard to even fathom. A national dependency ratio of over 100% means that for every 100 working-age adults in the entire country, there were literally more than 100 children requiring support.
That is an incredibly wide, heavy base of the population pyramid.
Mm.
It crushes the fiscal capacity of the state.
Because the government is forced to spend every available tax dollar just building basic primary schools and pediatric clinics simply to keep the massive youth population alive and fundamentally housed.
Right, there is no capital left for higher education, research and development, or building advanced industrial infrastructure.
But a dependency ratio doesn't hit 101% just because families are having a lot of children.
No, it doesn't.
There is a deeply tragic structural reason why the ratio of adults to children became so violently skewed, and that brings us to the shadow of the HIV/AIDS epidemic.
The health data from the late 1990s and into the 2000s reveals a demographic catastrophe. Zimbabwe was situated at the very epicenter of the global HIV/AIDS crisis.
Yeah.
The World Bank data shows that HIV prevalence among adults aged 15 to 49 peaked at over 20%.
1 in 5 working-age adults.
1 in 5. And these were the people in the absolute prime of their economic and societal lives.
These experienced teachers, the master farmers, the mid-level civil servants, the factory managers.
Exactly. The sudden, brutal decimation of this specific demographic cohort is the exact mechanism that caused the dependency ratio to skyrocket,
Because the productive adults were dying at catastrophic rates.
leaving behind millions of orphan children who still needed to be fed, clothed, and educated by a shrinking pool of surviving workers.
The cascading ripple effects on the broader health system are just horrifying to track in the data set. Because the medical infrastructure was completely overwhelmed by the epidemic, we see a tragic reversal in child mortality.
Which is very rare. Normally, as developing nations progress, child mortality steadily drops.
But here, the under 5 mortality rate violently reversed course, spiking to 92.5 per 1,000 live births in the late 90s and early 2000s.
Nearly 10% of all children born were not making it to their 5th birthday.
It completely hollows out the human capital foundation of the nation. You have a massive swelling base of young people, but the adults who possess the knowledge, the skills, and the capital to teach them and build the economy for them are fighting a devastating plague.
It's a generational tragedy, but, the data does show a vital, positive shift that we absolutely must acknowledge.
Yes, the aggressive rollout of antiretroviral therapy, or ART.
Exactly. It eventually gained immense traction. The coverage expanded, prevalence rates began to drop, and mortality rates have since plummeted significantly.
People are now living long, productive lives with HIV.
Which is amazing. But the economic scar tissue of losing that much of an entire generation's expertise and earning power, well, it echoes for decades.
And that echo is most visible when we transition to the education data. This is where the paradox of human capital really crystallizes into a structural economic barrier.
Yeah, the education gap in this data is fascinating because it almost seems contradictory at first glance.
Right. Because if we look at primary school gross enrollment, the numbers are incredible. It sits at over 100% specifically, 105.1% in recent years.
And just for clarity, gross enrollment can exceed 100% because it includes older students who are repeating grades or starting late.
But it proves that the physical bodies are in the classrooms. On paper, universal primary education is essentially achieved.
But the structural flaw reveals itself the moment you look at the transition to the next phase of learning. The gross enrollment for secondary school plummets down to the 40–50% range.
Wait, really? It drops that much?
Yeah. More than half of the youth in the country are vanishing from the formal education system somewhere between elementary school and high school.
Why does that massive drop-off happen?
Well, if we connect it back to the macroeconomic data, the mechanisms become clear. Families hit by hyperinflation simply cannot afford secondary school fees.
Oh, right. And children living in rural areas might not have a physical high school within walking distance, and there is no infrastructure to transport them.
Or, tying it back to the demographic data we just discussed, an older sibling in an orphaned household has to drop out at age 12 to work the family farm just to keep their younger siblings fed.
So the macroeconomic consequence is that the nation is building a bridge only halfway across the river.
That's the perfect analogy. Primary school provides foundational literacy and numeracy. You learn to read text and perform basic arithmetic.
But secondary school is where a workforce acquires cognitive adaptability, technical foundations, and the critical thinking skills absolutely necessary for modern, industrial, administrative, or high-tech work.
And the data indicates the problem is even deeper than the dropout rate itself. The World Bank tracking introduces a metric called learning poverty.
Okay, what is learning poverty?
It's a precise indicator that measures the percentage of 10-year-olds who are fundamentally unable to read and comprehend a simple, age-appropriate text.
Wow, even with 105% enrollment.
Exactly. Despite Zimbabwe's historical reputation for high literacy, digging into the repeater rates and the actual quality of teaching reveals severe systemic issues.
It is the devastating phenomenon of schools but no learning. You could have 105.1% primary enrollment, but if the trained teachers have emigrated to neighboring countries because their salaries were destroyed by inflation.
Or if there are 70 children sharing a single textbook.
Right. The actual functional human capital being generated is dangerously low.
And if you possess a massive labor pool that has foundational literacy but completely lacks technical secondary level skills, your economy is effectively trapped in amber.
You cannot diversify your industries away from raw mineral extraction.
You just can't. You cannot build a competitive, modern service sector or a high-end manufacturing base because the labor pool simply does not have the specific, advanced training that global capital requires.
So if half the youth drop out after primary school, and as we established with the governance ceiling, there are no formal factories or tech hubs waiting to hire them, where do these millions of people go every morning?
What does the daily economic reality actually look like for the average citizen? Well, the labor market data provides a very clear, heavily quantified answer to that. To find the missing workforce, we have to look away from the corporate high-rises and the formal industrial parks.
We'll have to look at the informal sector.
Moving into the economic reality on the ground, the labor data reveals a massive, overwhelming reliance on what the World Bank categorizes as vulnerable employment.
And the numbers here redefine how we understand the economy. Vulnerable employment sits between 74% and 77% for women.
And for men, it's between 56% and 60%.
But the figure that truly paints the picture is this. 71% of total employment in Zimbabwe consists of self-employed individuals.
And contextualizing that 71% is critical, because when someone living in a highly developed post-industrial economy hears 71% self-employed, their mind immediately goes to a thriving startup culture.
Right, they picture freelance software developers, independent consultants, boutique small business owners.
The ultimate gig economy utopia.
Exactly.
But in a developing economy facing extreme structural headwinds, 71% self-employment is the exact opposite of a tech utopia.
What does it actually mean then?
Vulnerable employment means jobs completely lacking formal arrangements. It means zero decent working conditions, zero Social Security, no health insurance, and wildly unpredictable, inadequate earnings.
It is informal, low security, low output survival labor.
We are talking about subsistence entrepreneurship.
Like the woman selling tomatoes and unregulated goods on the side of a dusty road.
Or the young man engaged in informal, highly dangerous cross-border trading.
It's artisanal gold miners climbing into unsupported hazardous shafts with hand tools because there is literally no other way to generate cash that day.
Ask yourself, as a listener, to imagine your own career stripped of all formal protections. No HR department, no guaranteed Friday paycheck, no legal recourse if a client doesn't pay you.
You are purely hustling day to day on the street just to secure enough calories for your family.
And the macroeconomic impact of this is profound. When the vast majority of your population is engaged in pure survival labor within the informal sector, national economic growth completely fails to trickle down.
Because they're completely decoupled.
Right. Remember the 13.2% natural resource rents we talked about?
Yeah.
If the global price of platinum doubles tomorrow, the formal mining conglomerates and the government capture all of that surplus value.
And the person selling vegetables on the street or driving an informal taxi sees absolutely zero benefit from that GDP spike.
The formal economy, which tracks GDP, and the informal economy, where the actual human beings live, become completely, permanently decoupled.
So what does this all mean? How does a modern developing nation bypass this?
Well, the narrative we constantly hear in tech and development circles is digital leapfrogging.
Right. We saw it in places like Kenya with mobile money, where the population bypassed traditional brick-and-mortar banking infrastructure entirely by using basic cell phones.
And Pisa is the classic example.
Can't Zimbabwe just use the digital revolution to pull this massive informal workforce into the global modern economy?
The digital leapfrogging theory is excellent, but the physical infrastructure data from the World Bank shatters that hope.
It does.
Yeah, we look at the indicators for the digital divide, and it isn't just a gap, it's a chasm. Fixed broadband penetration is shockingly low, sitting at just 1.62 subscriptions per 100 people.
Wow. 1.62 per 100, over 98% of the population does not have a fixed broadband connection.
You cannot participate in the global digital economy on a spotty 3G mobile connection that drops every time it rains.
And examining the server infrastructure confirms this, doesn't it?
It does. Secure internet servers are the fundamental backbone of e-commerce, digital services, data protection, and modern banking. The country sits at just 9.9 secure servers per 1 million people.
9.9 servers for 1 million people. That's practically zero.
This severe lack of digital infrastructure means Zimbabwe is effectively locked out of the leapfrogging phase that other developing nations have utilized to build high-value service sectors.
You cannot build a thriving business process outsourcing industry or a remote tech hub or a massive e-commerce network with 1.62 broadband connections per 100 people and a highly fragile electricity grid.
And building that kind of robust national digital infrastructure requires immense capital.
Which they don't have because of the negative 31.37% adjusted net savings we talked about in the very beginning.
Exactly. They are burning the floorboards just to survive the day. They aren't laying down thousands of miles of fiber optic cables.
And to make the capital situation even more dire, whatever funds the government does manage to scrape together are constantly being vacuumed up by external debt.
The crushing weight of external debt is the final shackle here. During the intense crisis periods of the late 2000s, external debt spiked to an overwhelming 39% of gross national income.
For a country already dealing with a fragile, hyperinflated currency and critically low foreign reserves, simply servicing that debt, just paying the interest to international creditors, acts as a massive, unavoidable vacuum.
It relentlessly sucks up the public funds that should be utilized to bridge that secondary education gap, or to build those secure digital servers, or to upgrade the pediatric health clinics.
The constant demand of debt servicing effectively crowds out all productive domestic investment.
And the final piece of data we need to look at proves the ultimate consequence of this entire cycle. We look at the export data, specifically focusing on high-tech exports.
This statistic is the one that really hurts to look at because it shows what could have been.
Yeah.
Historically, Zimbabwe had a relatively complex, somewhat diversified industrial base. High-tech exports once stood at a very respectable 14% of manufactured exports. They were producing and selling complex goods.
But today, that number has cratered. It has fallen below 2.7%.
A drop from 14% below 2.7% is the ultimate, undeniable proof of a regressing economy.
The country is moving backward on the economic complexity scale. It is rapidly losing whatever foothold it had in global competitiveness and retreating entirely to raw material extraction.
It is actively deindustrializing. Think about the psychological exhaustion that permeates a society in this situation.
It's heavy.
You have millions of people working incredibly hard, 71% of them hustling in the precarious informal sector every single day, navigating broken infrastructure and unpredictable currency. And yet they see absolutely no collective national progress.
The nation is sweating, it is working, but the wealth is vanishing into thin air.
It creates a deep, pervasive societal fatigue that makes organizing for reform even more difficult.
It really does.
Looking at this specific, massive mountain of data, I have to challenge the standard development playbook entirely.
Let's hear it.
We always hear in Western policy circles that developing nations just need a targeted IMF loan to build a highway or a grant to launch an innovation hub to, fix things.
Right, the silver bullet approach.
But this data clearly implies that throwing broadband access or foreign loan money at the problem without fixing the underlying institutional foundation is completely useless.
This raises an important question then. How can any nation actually break this paradox and rebuild from the ground up? Because your assessment is accurate. If you pour premium fuel into an engine with completely misaligned tracks and broken valves, you are going to go faster. You are just going to cause a bigger explosion.
You have to rebuild the engine first.
So let's look at the blueprint for that engine. Based on this massive deep dive, synthesizing all the World Bank data, from GDP volatility to vulnerable employment, how do we reverse the negative wealth paradox?
We've distilled the solution into 3 non-negotiable core pillars.
The first pillar is the absolute foundational prerequisite for everything else: repair governance.
We discussed the worldwide governance indicators at length. Reversing those metrics is step 1.
And a nation does not need to become a flawless utopian bureaucracy overnight.
Right.
But moving corruption control and the rule of law from the bottom 10%, first or fourth percentiles just up to the global average, the 50th percentile, fundamentally changes the entire economic calculus.
Getting to the global average means that basic contracts are respected in court. It means a foreign logistics company can invest $100 million in a facility, knowing it won't be arbitrarily expropriated by a local official.
It means the friction is finally reduced enough for domestic capital to actually accumulate instead of fleeing the country.
Without at least average governance, no amount of foreign aid, debt relief, or natural resource wealth will ever stick. It will all continue to be lost to rent-seeking and systemic inefficiency.
Pillar number 2, invest in human capital. Specifically, they must bridge that massive, glaring gap between primary and secondary education.
Right, the half-built bridge.
The severe demographic burden of the past, that 101.79% dependency ratio, is slowly shifting as the youth population matures. But to turn that heavy demographic burden into a powerful demographic dividend, those young people desperately need advanced technical skills.
You can't just teach a child to read a basic sentence at age 10 and then drop them into the informal sector at age 12 to sell vegetables.
Right.
You have to build the second half of the educational bridge. You need vocational training, digital literacy, and advanced sciences so they can walk across that bridge into a formal, highly productive economy.
And the third pillar binds it all together. Ensure sustainable savings. They must actively stop the negative wealth cycle.
Fixing that adjusted net savings metric, getting it out of the negative 31% ditch.
Growth cannot continue to come at the cost of depleting finite natural resources without equal or greater reinvestment.
Right.
If the country extracts $100 million worth of platinum from the ground, that $100 million cannot just evaporate into government operating expenses, debt interest, or corruption.
A legally mandated, strictly protected percentage of those resource rents must be diverted into a genuine national savings mechanism.
Like a sovereign wealth fund, or direct ring-fenced investment into the digital infrastructure and secondary schools we just discussed.
Stop burning the floorboards. Sell a floorboard if you have to, but use that cash to buy structural steel and bricks and build a much better permanent house.
That is the only mathematical, logical way out of the negative wealth paradox.
And this brings us all the way back to you, the listener.
Why does this matter to them?
Why does a deep dive into decades of Zimbabwean economic data matter to you, whether you're listening from a high-rise in London, a suburb in New York, or an office in Tokyo?
It matters because Zimbabwe is a stark, mathematically undeniable case study proving that a country rarely fails simply because it lacks natural resources.
Or because it lacks human potential or work ethic.
The inherent potential is clearly there. The physical wealth is literally in the ground, and the immense resilience is undeniably present in the people surviving the informal sector every day.
What it critically lacks is the institutional engine required to turn those raw inputs into lasting, multi-generational wealth.
It is a profound lesson that true prosperity requires much, much more than just digging value out of the dirt or printing high top-line GDP numbers to impress observers.
It requires the invisible, often boring infrastructure of trust, enforceable law, and long-term planning.
Which leaves us with a lingering question for you to deeply ponder. If an entire national economy can suffer from the negative wealth paradox, where the top-line income goes up but the actual structural wealth disappears entirely.
Take a hard look at your own local economy, your own corporate business strategy, or even your own industry.
Are the specific metrics you use to measure growth every quarter actually capturing true, sustainable value creation?
Or are you, in some small way, just burning your own future resources to make today's spreadsheet look good?
Until next time.
Keep diving deep.